Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes, Associate Professor of Old Testament at Biola University. Today we're continuing our study of Exodus, and we're in chapter 22, verses 1 through 6. We're in the middle of the laws that God gave Israel at Mount Sinai. And these are not usually considered to be very inspiring or useful for Christians today to read. I hope that if you've been following with me through this series, that you've become convinced that there is so much wisdom here for us to glean for the life of faith. So today we're going to do this in two parts. This section of Exodus 22 is concerning liability for loss of property. So we first have the first 4 verses of chapter 22 deal with stolen animals. And then verses 5 and 6 deal with negligence while grazing or burning. And these continue to follow the grammatical structure that I've introduced in a previous video, the Khoury structure. So you find the particle ki, which is translated if in Hebrew, in verses 1, 5, and 6. So those are the 3 places where a new paragraph starts, verses 1, 5, and 6. And then the word im, which is also usually translated if, but it introduces a subcategory, is found in verses 2, 3, and 4. It's worth noting that there's a different chapter break in Hebrew than there is in English. So verse 1 in our English Bibles is included with chapter 21 in Hebrew, but it actually works better grammatically to include it in chapter 22 as our English Bibles have done because of this Khoury structure. If we left it where it is in the Hebrew Bible, then we would have subcategories starting off the chapter, which doesn't quite make sense. So let me read from my translation of the Hebrew, and then we'll talk about what it's saying. Chapter 22, verse 1. If a man steals a bull or a sheep or goat and slaughters it or sells it, 5 cattle he shall repay for the bull, and 4 from the flock for the sheep. If the thief is found while breaking in and he is struck and he dies, there is no blood guilt. If the sun has risen upon him, there is blood guilt for him. He must surely make restitution. If he has nothing, then he must be sold for his theft. If what was stolen is surely found in his hand, whether bull or donkey or sheep, he must repay 2 living animals. Okay, so what are we dealing with here? Well, this first paragraph deals with stolen animals that could not be returned. So at first, it's animals that could not be returned. So it's a man who steals an animal and then either slaughters it to eat it or sells it to someone else. So when he's caught, having done so, he cannot return the animal. There is a steep penalty for someone who steals and then disposes of his neighbor's property, his neighbor's animals. This law is meant to be a deterrent from stealing in the first place. So 2 different metrics are used to decide how much the thief must repay. So if it's a large animal, such as an ox or a bull, then 5 large animals have to be returned for the one that was stolen. The Hebrew word shor can mean either cattle or ox, so it could be either. These are large animals that are essential for farming. Probably the penalty is so steep because it takes a lot to feed and raise these animals until they get to the point where they can do work, and then to train them to do the kind of work you want to do. So it's a big deal for somebody to steal this. It's like stealing your neighbor's tractor if you're a farmer. And then smaller animals such as sheep or goats, that the word is seh in Hebrew, and it can mean either a sheep or a goat. It's just 4 small animals have to be given to replace one that was stolen. Now, why the difference? Perhaps because sheep and goats are not as essential to the farming practices, and so the loss to the farmer is less than if it's a large animal. Now, it's worth noting that the ancient Near Eastern laws about theft of animals are even more strict than this. We see things like you have to pay back 12 to 15 live animals, or the thief is to be beaten, or even the death penalty is administered for theft. So against this wider environment, one of the most striking things is that there is no death penalty. Theft does not incur a death penalty because life is more important than property. So the Bible never calls for death penalty for someone who is a thief. Now, verses 2 and 3 are dealing with a particular subcategory, two sub-scenarios under the theft of animals, the theft of a neighbor's animals. And that is, what happens if the thief is caught and struck and then he dies? And the passage says that if it happens at night, the owner of the house who struck the thief is not guilty of bloodshed. That is, there's no death penalty for murder because he's acting in self-defense and it's happening at night. So presumably, if it's happening at night, the thief has the possibility of having more nefarious plans towards the homeowner. You can't tell what someone is actually doing at night. And they're trying to be more surreptitious in their gathering of their neighbor's goods. And so there's no death penalty if the thief happens to die while being struck at night. However, if the sun has risen and the homeowner still strikes the thief so severely that he dies, then he is guilty of bloodshed. So self-defense is allowed at night, but daytime break-ins should not result in death, presumably because you can see what you're doing in the daytime. And your goal should not be to kill the thief, but to deter the thief from breaking in. So anyone who would kill a thief during the day is being excessive in their use of self-defense. Again, life is more important than property. Now, in halfway through verse 3, we then switch back to the focus on the thief. He must surely make restitution. If he has nothing, then he must be sold for his theft. And I put sold in quote marks. This is referring to something we've already talked about several times in the Mishpatim, and that is that he would become an indentured servant in order to pay off the debt that he's incurred through theft. So that he's not being made a permanent slave. There's already regulations that prevent this from becoming permanent in chapter 21, verses 2 through 7. So this is a specific case in which if a man is caught in the act of stealing, he can obviously just give back what he stole. It's not gone yet. But he must pay double what he stole because, again, this is a deterrent to prevent someone from stealing in the first place. If all you have to do is give back what you stole, then what's to prevent people from trying over and over again to steal things to see what they can get away with and just hope they don't get caught? In this case, once he is caught, he has to make restitution, which is always more than the amount that he stole, which means it's not going to be worth it to steal because it's going to put you deeper in the hole financially. So a thief unable to repay must become an indentured servant. Verse 4, if the animal is still living, if what was stolen is found in his hand, he's still in possession of it, then the repayment amount is much less. So if he hasn't eaten the animal or sold it to someone else, then all he has to do is give back the animal he stole plus one more. So instead of 5 times more or 4 times more, it's just double. Again, presumably because now the homeowner is receiving back the actual animal that he trained and raised and loves and maybe named. So the penalty is not quite as stiff. In verse 4, we also have the addition of donkeys. So it's bull or donkey or sheep to kind of expand out and say this is not just 2 animals we're talking about. It's really any animal that would be found. That then brings us to a new paragraph. So let me read verses 5 and 6 together. These are 2 separate issues in Hebrew, but I'll read them together. If a man allows a field or vineyard to be grazed by sending his beasts so that they graze in another's field, from the best of his field or from the best of his vineyard, he must make restitution. If a fire breaks out, spreads to thorn bushes, and consumes piles of grain or standing grain or the field, the one who started the fire must surely repay double. Okay, we have some interesting wordplay going on in Hebrew here. The word ba'ar in Hebrew can mean either graze, it's fairly rare for it to mean graze, but it can mean graze or burn. And it's the presence of animals in verse 5 that tells us we're talking about grazing. So he sends his beasts into his neighbor's field. He's thinking, oh man, I don't want to have my animals in my field because they're going to eat food that I want my family to be able to eat. So I'll send them next door and let them feast in the neighbor's field, and then I'll have more food for myself. This is a very selfish decision. He is stealing what belongs to his neighbor by allowing his animals to eat in his neighbor's field or vineyard. Presumably, the animals would also trample the ground and make a mess as well. So this is not good neighborly behavior. In verse 6, it's about a fire that breaks out. So fire would have been a normal tool that farmers used to control weeds, to get rid of non-edible byproducts of farming. It helps fertilize the land. But if you're going to burn your field, you need to be very careful that the fire doesn't get out of hand and burn your neighbor's field as well. Thorns are especially combustible, so if you've got thorn bushes in between your fields, the fire could easily catch those and then go into your neighbor's field. So the idea here in either case is that the one who started the problem has to make restitution for his neighbor's loss. And notice that the consumed grain, the grain that the animals ate of the neighbor's field, is assumed to be of the highest quality, because the perpetrator is told he has to make restitution from the best of his field or the best of his vineyard. No like leftovers or stale food or whatever, like, okay, you can have this damaged stuff. You have to give them from the best of your field. So in the first case, the animals grazing the neighbor's field is not accidental. The neighbor actually sends them into the field on purpose. In the second case with the fire, it is accidental. You didn't mean for the fire to go into your neighbor's field, but it is preventable, because if you'd been taking special precautions, then it would not have spread. So what's the bottom line? In this passage, we see that neighborly behavior requires more from us than just not stealing. We must also take special care of what belongs to others. The biblical laws are teaching us how to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that is why Jesus can summarize the law in the New Testament by saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Have a great week.